Here we go.
Outrageous!
Hello, my name is John, and I love to talk movies, especially action movies, comic book movies, as well as comic book TV, and the occasional anime. So if any of that interests you, consider clicking that subscribe button. And today we are continuing on my James Bond journey, where I watched through the James Bond franchise, most of the films for the first time. And today we're on to probably the best one yet. And that is 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service, directed by Peter Hunt, starring George Lazenby, the one and only Bond film to star George Lazenby. And if you can't tell, I'm pretty excited because I thought this was a magnificent film. So I guess let's get started by talking about the action. There's very, very little complaints here. Most of the action probably takes place in the second half, and something I'll probably bring up a little bit later as well is they did a great job in the first half with doing spy elements to build up tension to have such a great, impactful, action-packed second half of the movie. And with that, the setting of the movie, taking it place in a ski resort, provides for some great action set pieces, whether it's skiing. The avalanche scene I thought was just really well handled. And I absolutely loved how they worked in a race car scene, an action scene on a race car track that happened in the middle of a race. I loved all of that. And it's very hard to find many negatives within the realm of the action in this movie. Unless I'm extremely nitpicky, then maybe the bobsled scene at the end might not have aged particularly well, or the conclusion of the action set piece wasn't necessarily the greatest, but that's just very nitpicky. Overall, there's not really any complaints to have with the action in this movie. On to the acting and the characters. George Lazenby plays a phenomenal Bond, although I don't necessarily know on a performance level if it's necessarily better than Sean Connery. It's definitely better than a couple of the movies, but I don't necessarily know if its performance is necessarily better. But I do think writing-wise and characterization is better. I think Lazenby's Bond has the best lines out of any of these movies, and has more character. George Lazenby's Bond has more character development in this one movie than Sean Connery's Bond had in the previous 5 movies combined. And that's not to say I didn't like those movies. I liked 4 out of the 5 of them. But I still think this movie gave Bond much more depth and character development that just adds to the suspense and whatnot. And then also on to Contessa is what Bond called her. IMDb lists her as Tracy, which is what her father called her. But anyway, Diana Rigg's character, I thought her performance was great and the character was great, and I loved how they built up the relationship between her character and James Bond. That was all done really well, as well as Blofeld. As much as I love Donald Pleasance, I think Telly Savalas does a better job, and he just kind of has a better characterization and gravitas to the character of Blofeld. And I thought he fit the role a little better. So I guess let's talk about the visuals. There's not too much to say here, but I will say the production design, as with all of these Bond films, at least so far, is really good. Not much to complain about. I love the design of the Piz Gloria, of Blofeld's lair. It was all pretty well done. Cinematography, it's not noticeably great, but it's also not noticeably bad. It's maybe one of the aspects that it's not as good as the Sean Connery films before it, but it's still good. It's not going to take you out of it, and it does a good job capturing the action sequences as well. With the exception of maybe the first action sequence, there's a small little moment. It almost seemed like the cameraman almost dropped his camera, but in the car when a car hit a bump or something. It was a little weird, but that's one small second of the movie. And then a little bit with the visuals. I don't necessarily think the final bobsled sequence aged particularly well from a visual standpoint, but that's a little nitpicky as well. So I guess let's move on to the story. This is a very well written, this is probably the best written Bond movie up to this point. And a lot of that is because of the character development within this movie. As I mentioned before, the Lazenby's Bond having more development than Sean Connery's previous films, as well as the relationship between Bond and Contessa. And it adds to the suspense in the second half. And then it helps with the ending of this movie, building that relationship so well within the movie. It adds to making a heartbreaking ending, spoiler alert, to this film. And then I think the pacing is done very well. Oh, and another thing about the character development that I forgot to mention is Moneypenny's character. In the previous film, she's just kind of been this secretary that occasionally flirts with James Bond, but in this film, it kind of gave her a charming, heartfelt, small little story and moments within it that I personally enjoyed quite a bit. And then I guess onto the pacing. The pacing is pretty good. They do a great job in the first half of the film focusing more on spy stuff, and they do a good job with the story as well to help build up a lot of tension through those moments. And then when you get to the second half of the film and you have all these big action sequences, it just helps you enjoy them and it helps you be more invested into them. So I do think the pacing for the most part is pretty well, but I do think somewhere in the middle section of this film when he's pretending to be was it like Sir Hillary, I think, and he's kind of shacked up with a bunch of these hypnotized or mind controlled girls of Blofeld's. That part, it needed to be there to kind of drive the plot along and drive along Blofeld's plan and all of that stuff. But I do think they spent a little too much time on it. And so one of the small little negative is the runtime. I think is a little too long. And I think that middle section is where you could kind of cut out some of that section to kind of speed it, to kind of move the film along a little bit at a faster pace. As well as during that moment, you do kind of deviates from the Bond-Contessa relationship, but you do get back around to it. And so you still end up getting great development between that, as I mentioned many times before this. And so that is small little issue or negative with the film, is the runtime and kind of that middle section feeling a little unnecessary moments in it, even though the section as a whole did need to be in there. And then moving on to the sound, I think the theme for this movie is pretty good, especially when you're in the opening credits sequence. I thought that was very good, theme and stuff to have within that. And they utilize a James Bond theme well and use it well in action sequences to help with tension and stuff. And I do think the kind of song, I believe Louis Armstrong's song, "We Have All the Time in the World," is, as an individual song, I don't think it's as good as the previous songs, but I think it thematically fits this movie better than most of those. And so I think that was a nice touch as well. Then there's not necessarily a specific moment like some of the previous movies had that stick out, but this movie does a good job knowing when to use sound to build tension and when to not use it to build tension as well. So I do think the sound of this movie is done really well. The sound editing and mixing and the score, it's all pretty well done and enjoyable. So let's just move on to the rating. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a fantastic and phenomenal spy action thriller. It's paced pretty well. It's got great character development, great acting. The only real issue is maybe it runs a little too long, and kind of that middle section kind of deviates a little too much, but it's still just a phenomenal action, spy, thriller, phenomenal James Bond movie. And so I think overall, On Her Majesty's Secret Service deserves a whopping 4.5. Thanks for watching my video. If you've seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service, or even if you're just a big James Bond fan, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you liked this movie, if you liked this video, if you liked me, go ahead and smash that thumbs up button. And consider clicking that subscribe button if you'd like to see me continue this James Bond journey that I'm on. And even if you enjoy movies, comics, and anime as I do, and as always, have a great day.